Hello there, folks. Welcome to the CFL This Week. I am your host, Bubba O-Neil, and thank you for joining us for the Top Talk in CFL. And as always, we try to bring to you the top talent and, of course, the best host to entertain you and inform you with our topics of the week. And every once in a while, we run into some technical issues. You know how today's modern day Zoom goes. And one of our outstanding guests, Bob Marjanovic, the voice of the BC Lions, there was some technical issues and that we were dealing with. So if you're watching on the video, you may see him, might sound a little distorted. And if you're listening to the podcast, unfortunately, we've taken him out for this week. And we're really, really hoping and looking forward to having him join us in a future broadcast. But with that said, this is another outstanding show. You don't want to miss it. Let me send you straight to it. This week's edition of the CFL This Week on the Ticats Audio Network.
From the Ticats Audio Network, this is the CFL This Week with Bubba O-Neil.
Welcome to the CFL This Week, your place for constant, nonstop, controversial, fun, opinionated CFL talk. I'm your host, Bubba O-Neil, on the Ticats Audio Network. Again, three wonderful guests to talk about the game that we love. That is the Canadian Football League. And let us start with the main man in the booth. He is a former Tiger Cat, a former Calgary Stampeder. Of course, we do know him as the analyst, not only just for CFL on TSN, but he may be the most wise guy we know when it comes to what's going on in the Canadian college game as well, too, and what's coming up and feed the CFL. Duane, Forde, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And Kristina Costabile, deputy editor of the CFL.ca. She knows all the insides of what's going on. So we love having you here for our chat. So let's get right into it, guys. I'm going to start off with I think an interesting conversation in the fact that I think we can all assume at this point of the league of the season, Winnipeg would be, if you did your power rankings, ranked number one. My question to all three of you, and we'll start with you, Kristina. Who is the second best team in the league?
I think it's the BC Lions. I love their offense. We obviously can see what Michael Riley does every single week after his elbow was feeling a little bit better. Even when he had that broken wing, I still feel like in week one, we still saw some great stuff from Michael. They have the league's leading receiver in Lucky Whitehead, but I also really like their defense. Yes, they're giving up a lot of yards, but they're also the second team that's giving up the least amount of touchdowns, just behind Winnipeg, actually. So that's the part where that it matters the most. And they're leading the league in interceptions, which I think those two stats are probably a little bit more important than yards given up. So I love this BC Lions team. And I'm not just saying that because you're here, Maj, but I really do like this BC Lions team. And I think that they are maybe going to be a contender in the West to kind of give that little bit of a push to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers.
Duane?
If I were to say right now, I'm going to say Saskatchewan, but I'm going to say that with an asterisk because I think that things in the Canadian Football League are evolving. And what I mean is, in terms of people coming back from injuries, rosters are going to change a little bit, some teams more than others as we go down the stretch. And so for me, where it matters most who the next best team is going to be come December, come the end of November when we get into playoffs and Grey Cup. And the team that might be the best team, second best team, maybe even the best team at that point, in my opinion, is the Hamilton Tiger Cats. When you look at Hamilton's roster and what they're doing right now and the people with whom they are doing it, you're going to see a drastically different Hamilton team, assuming that people get healthy. And, we've talked about this a little bit on air, but Hamilton's defense is playing lights out. Special teams is very good. Frankie Williams is obviously a game breaker for them in the return game. Offensively right now, they have won back-to-back games playing with a third-string quarterback, playing with basically a group of rookie receivers. You've got 2 second-year guys and 3 first-year CFLers in the receiving corps, and you've got 4 guys playing in new positions on the offensive line, and they're finding ways to get it done. So you consider that offensive line gains experience as the year goes on. You get one or both of Dane Evans and Jeremiah Masoli back as the year comes on, and you hopefully get Brandon Banks, Braylon Addison, and Devere Posey back in your receiving corps, plus the experience gained by the guys that have been filling in for them. Hamilton's the team to watch down the stretch.
But Duane, let me throw you that there. I mean, first of all, you got to make a decision on the quarterback, right? I mean, and I think, I think Masoli could be ready as early as this week, and we just don't know how long the rope will be for him when Dane is probably healthy in a couple of weeks. You're talking about bringing back the likes of a Brandon Banks, who, was off to a shaky start. Let's be honest here. And then a DeVere Posey that's never played with any of these quarterbacks, and even Braylon Addison, who hasn't played in 2 years. Do you think you can just gel that quickly?
Yeah, I honestly think you can. I think you've got enough time. Obviously, if you're talking about these guys coming back in game 14, that's a different question. That's a different issue, obviously. But I mean, you talk about making decisions between the quarterbacks. I think all 9 CFL head coaches would gladly be forced in the difficult position of having to make that decision, right? Between a guy who is an MOP finalist and a guy who led his team to the Grey Cup game and a franchise record in wins. So that's an easy one. Yes, Brandon Banks is off to a slow start. Brandon Banks was playing in a different receiving core than the one he left. He hadn't been at 100%. Some time off actually does Brandon Banks some good. And again, when you plug some other veteran guys in, or the same group of young guys with whom he was playing, but now with a number of games of experience, as opposed to in the first few games of their CFL career, the dynamics of that entire receiving core change, and I think change in a way that's beneficial to Brandon Banks.
Your pick of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, does last Friday's or last weekend's game against the BC Lions, that Riders game, did that influence your decision?
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of that, but I almost wonder if maybe they'll get the running game established before then. We're only in week 9 right now, right? We're halfway through. And if it's obviously an area of concern for the coaching staff, perhaps, I'm not saying that they'll go out and get somebody like a Powell or a Stanback, but maybe they'll start trying to implement those guys more in the backfield moving forward, so that when it does get cold and when you do need that running game heading into the later stretch, especially because the end of the season this year is into November with the pushback season. So perhaps that they'll be able to implement them more into the run game as we're going on, especially if it has already been kind of asterisked as a area of concern.
I think, when we think about the last 20 years, the last 2 decades, there seems to be one consistent thing going on in the CFL, which has been either a 9 or team league. It seems to me that the West is always dominating the East, especially in the regular season. Duane, why does this happen year after year after year? Yeah. Not necessarily in the Grey Cup, but at least in the regular season.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something I've looked at in the past and have developed my own little theory on this, and a lot of it simply has to do with the environment we're in, right? Like I have compared it to the old joke about a group of guys in the woods getting chased by a bear, and you say, I don't need to outrun the bear, I just need to outrun one of the other guys, basically. And that's kind of been the situation in the CFL's East Division. Is you're talking about a 4-team division where 3 teams make the playoffs, and so you only have to be better than one team, and there has always been at least one team that, for whatever reason, has really struggled, right? It hasn't been overly challenging to not be the worst team in the East and have a chance at making the playoffs. Whereas you look over in the West and you look at sort of what your record has to be like. Yes, you can make the playoffs as a crossover team finishing in 4th place. But when you look year after year at, in recent memory, at how many wins you have to guarantee yourself one of the top 3 spots, you've got to be pretty good. And so automatically, if you're the general manager, the head coach of a West team in the offseason planning for the coming season versus the general manager of an East team, call it a subconscious thing. I mean, presumably everybody wants to put together the best team possible, but in terms of what you need to do to give yourself a chance to win your division, and as you said, you get to the Grey Cup, it's a 1-game thing, right? So, but when you look at what you have to do to win your division and who you have to be better than, the fact is it has become that you have to put together a better team in the West. And that's the reality of it. Because it has been more competitive, it remains more competitive. And I do think that the other piece of it is kind of from a media point of view. When you look at some of the centers in the West, their teams are under way more scrutiny, way more media scrutiny, way more fan scrutiny in the West than they are in the East as Canadian Football League teams that if you want to avoid basically getting ripped in the media or sort of getting publicly ripped, what have you, you've got to step up in the West more than you do in the East.
Kristina, do you agree with that?
I do, to a certain extent. The first part for sure. That's actually what I was going to say as well, Duane, is I feel like I've been asked this question a million times. Why is it so much better in the West? And sometimes it is kind of difficult to pinpoint exactly why, but I do agree with the fact that because there's more teams over there, and there's also a few teams that have been competitive and building that winning culture for so long. You look at obviously the Calgary Stampeders, who have been very good for very long. Even Edmonton had that run of Grey Cups as well. And I think that because those teams have been so good, it kind of breeds the competition for the rest of the teams to have to meet that standard. And in the East, there hasn't necessarily been that much consistency in terms of winning culture in any of those squads, especially when they had, Ottawa's only been around for a certain amount of years, and there's been some different general managers and coaching staff. So I think that because there's more competitive nature in the West, it just breeds for the other teams to want to be able to reach up to that level.
Let's roll right off that. I mean, I think it's fair to say over the years that the East is inconsistent. When I think inconsistent right now in the CFL, the number one team to me seems to be the Montreal Alouettes. They go into Toronto, they lose a tight game, didn't really show up for the first half, got strong in the second half. They're now 2-4. Is it time to wonder if this team, Kristina, are contenders or pretenders?
I love this question because I think that they're so on the cusp, but I'm going that they're still contenders. We're looking in this East Division that we were just talking about, how things are close. So you're never really down and out. And I think they're so close in the sense that they just need to limit a few mistakes. I'm looking back at that Toronto game where Vernon Adams threw that errant pass that got picked off, which led to a Boris Bede field goal. And then, of course, we know how that one ended with Toronto obviously coming back and getting that Montreal coming back, not being able to get the comeback. So I think limiting mistakes at the quarterback position is a big one. And I know we've all talked about Vernon Adams a million times, where he can either be the best we've ever seen or just we're confused why he's making certain decisions. So I think especially at the QB position, if they can just limit those mistakes, I think they're in it. They haven't really been blown out by, their losses. They haven't. So if they just limit those little mistakes, I think that they're still in the race with Hamilton and Toronto.
Duane, you've seen this team probably the most out of us at a close range. What are you seeing? Because I agree with Kristina. The highs are incredibly high, but the lows, I mean, that game in Calgary a couple of weeks ago, they looked horrible.
Yeah, I think Kristina hit the nail on the head that the success of the Montreal Alouettes hinges on their quarterback, Vernon Adams. And, you can say that about so many teams in the Canadian Football League. Obviously, it's a quarterback-driven league, but it's really standing out this year. And when we last saw Vernon Adams in 2019, this guy was, and I think still is, one of the rising superstars in the Canadian Football League. And those highs are so high, but I think they've come to almost rely on those highs a little bit too much. And what I mean is when you look at this team offensively in particular, they're a team that they have a phenomenal run game. William Stanback in the offensive line, when they get going on the ground, absolutely fantastic. And this sets up a lot of opportunities for them in the pass. But the thing I find about their passing game, at least right now, is that they're so inconsistent in terms of relying a lot on the big play, and not necessarily when they don't get that big play, it's sort of like they haven't really figured out plan B yet, exactly what they're going to do with plan B. And so if they can get the passing game anywhere near the consistency of their running game, they become a frightening offense. But so much of that hinges on Vernon Adams kind of picking up, I would say, where he left off in 2019, as opposed to maybe trying to find his way, which obviously is a challenge for a lot of guys after a year and a half off.
Kristina, we talked about the stability of franchises, and not so much like financially, but again, in able to put together good quality teams year after year. It wasn't all that long ago where Montreal were, I think, the best team in the East at doing that.
Yeah, and I think they're well on their way to doing that. We've talked about 3 guys I think that are excellent in Vernon when he's excellent, and Eugene Lewis. I feel like he's one of the better receivers in the league this year that I don't think is getting enough attention as the Lucky Whiteheads and the Brian Burnhams of the world. I just feel like they have the pieces. Again, we've talked about William Stanback as well, one of the better running backs. So they have those pieces, and it's just a matter, like we've said a few times here, is it's the consistency that they just need to figure out, and I think they'll be well on their way.
All right, guys, let's end on this one, and I always like to end on a fun one. I think we could look at some of the good guys in this league, some either coaches or good teams, good individuals that we just love to cheer for. I think I want to know, who is the heel? Like, if you're thinking about wrestling, you're thinking about the boo. Like, who is the most disliked guy in the Canadian Football League, Duane?
I'm going to throw out 3 nominees, if I may. And it's guys who always seem to be in the middle of the action when there's a scrum. That, I mean, I don't know what's being said down there on the field. Sometimes I don't necessarily know what happens in every pileup, but there are a few guys that everybody always seems to be mad at for whatever reason. I would say one of them, a newcomer to the league, is Garrett Marino in Saskatchewan, defensive lineman. Always seems to be at the center of the action down there in the trenches and mixing it up a little bit. Another guy, and I love him. He's one of my favorite players to watch in the league because of the role he plays and the way he plays the game. But again, one of those guys that seems to be on the public enemy number whatever list is Nikola Kalinic, fullback in Hamilton. Oh. And number 3, I would say, is one that probably seems a little more obvious because he plays angry and and doesn't really seem to hide it. And I would say that's Toronto Argonauts nickel linebacker Chris Edwards. Those are my 3 nominees. I'm not going to pick one, but they're your nominees for the Villain of the Year award.
Kristina?
I'm going a little off the board here, and I'm actually not choosing a player. I'm choosing a thing, and it's the uprights. I feel like the uprights have been the Achilles heel. First of all, you go all the way back to 2019 in the Western Final. You can ask Cody Fajardo that question, that he's mad at the uprights. It happened to him again this year on the Labor Day game. And then in the Labor Day rematch, there was the Ticats kicker who missed the extra point by hitting it off the upright. And as a fan, I hate that. So that's my Achilles heel this year, is the uprights. It's the uprights.
Do you want them to move back like the NFL? Do you think that makes a difference?
I don't know if it's going to make a difference or not. I kind of like that they're in the front to make us a little bit different. But they just need to maybe move over a little bit. If they see it coming, just move them a little.
Flexible uprights.
Yes.
Hey, they should be made of string, hanging string.
Exactly, like those inflatable men.
Kristina, the fact that you're giving love to kickers, I mean, there's kickers all over the place right now that are really happy with you. Let's go back. Let's go back to Simone. Kristina, let's stay with you for this one there. Simone is the kind of guy that he if he finishes a play, makes a tackle, he's had a couple of pick sixes, he's going to let you know. Is there anything wrong with that?
I don't think so at all. I don't think at all. I think it's great for the game because it makes things interesting. And it's fun, especially when it's staying in between the lines and it's on the field, it's happening during the game. I think off the field, Simone is a very likable guy, and he's very nice, and he's always really willing to work with the media. But on the field, the chirping, I love it. Bring more of it. Let's mic him up next week.
Oh, I'm gonna tell you right now, we can't mic Simone up without a 7-second delay. We've tried that.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and I'm a big Simone fan too, and I think probably the thing that maybe prevents me from calling him a villain or a heel more than some of the other guys is the fact of having dealt with him in the media over a number of years. And as you said, Kristina, he's in the grand scheme of things, maybe not to opponents, but in the grand scheme of things, Simone is definitely one of the good guys. And I would say a guy who, despite the suspensions, or suspension, he's not a guy who's a dirty player. He's a guy who plays the game at full speed. And plays it with a lot of emotion that sometimes I think contributes to the perception of him, and maybe some of the dislike on the part of opponents, and maybe some visiting radio broadcasters, Moj. But I'm not sold on that one.
Duane, I mean, you were on the field. I mean, let me just throw the last question to you. And I always think of a guy like Alfred Payton. Like, that guy just talked a lot of BS. I was at a Tiger Cats game as a young boy. He gave the finger to the crowd. Like, this guy was unbelievable, but he was really good. He was a heck of a ball player. When you were on the field, who was just your irritant?
I would say the number one sort of villain of my playing days probably was Jeff Braswell, linebacker who played with a number of teams, spent some time in BC, Edmonton, Ottawa. He did a stint in Toronto. And, the great irony to me about Jeff Braswell in that role, I think most guys would tell you at that time, probably the dirtiest player in the league. I mean, the fact is, I actually got into the lineup for my first CFL game. I was inactive for the first couple of games of my rookie season, and the team went to play in Ottawa. Andy McVeigh was our starting fullback. And after making a block, he was down on the field behind the play. And as the play continued on, Jeff Braswell came up behind him and stomped on his ankle, basically, and wrenched his ankle, which led to Andy going on the injured list and me getting into my first game. And so, in some ways I should maybe be more grateful to Jeff Braswell, but the fact is, no, he was the number one dirtiest guy. I mean, there were other guys that talked a lot. Tyrone Jones talked a lot, James West, but I didn't necessarily find the physical antics from those guys. Whereas Braswell was something else, but I heard he was like an elementary school teacher or something like that in his non-football life. So, I mean, that goes to show you. Another guy who most people would tell you was a dirty guy to play against, who is one of my favorite guys in the league, both off the field and in his current role, is Mike O'Shea. I think honestly, Mike O'Shea, if she were wearing the wrong color jersey, I think O'Shea might have, given his own mother the fish hook in the bottom of a pile up. But as you guys all know, like, O'Shea's the greatest, most polite, classiest guy you will meet when it's not in an on-field competition.
Like I said, it's a crazy what happens when these guys. I mean, I can think of Jagari Davis to me is a guy that is the nicest guy to talk to, but I mean, when he's on the field and we're rushing the passer, it's unbelievable what he turns into. And I see that a lot on defensive lines nowadays with these guys. But you know what, folks? Kristina, Duane, Moj, it's been amazing talking to you guys. I hope that you got a little jokes out of this, and it's always fun getting everyone together to talk about the CFL, and we're going to do it again as always. So we thank you for joining us, folks. We always want to say thank you to the audience for joining us. It's amazing that you keep joining us in more numbers and more numbers. I think because we all want to find a place to talk about the CFL. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button on if you're watching on YouTube, and again, you know where to find us if you're listening on podcast form. Grab to your favorite place to grab the podcast. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been a great time. We'll see you next week. This is the CFL This Week on the Tiger Cats Audio Network.